Prepare for A Rood Awakening.
Shalom. This is Michael Rood at Ophel Gardens on Mount Moreh-Yah in Jerusalem. King David selected this very mountaintop as the location where the temple was to be built. He saw this mountain by revelation and knew that this was the place where all of the feasts of the Lord were to be rehearsed. David set aside a treasure to finance the temple that his son Solomon would build. 500 years after its completion, the temple was destroyed, and the royal family was exiled into Babylon, where the males were made eunuchs and trained to serve in the court of Nebuchadnezzar. One of these young men was Daniel. Daniel received detailed revelations concerning the coming of the Messiah. Some of that revelation we have on our hands today. Some Daniel was not allowed to divulge. Daniel was given specific revelations concerning the end of man's dominion upon the earth, but his attempts to calculate their fulfillment ended in disappointment. Sir Isaac Newton, one of the greatest scientists and mathematicians in history, spent many years of his life attempting to decode those same revelations. And, like Daniel, Newton went to his grave without understanding the divine equations. Isaac Newton was a genius, but even though he read Hebrew, he filtered the scriptures through a Western, Gentile mindset. He had no idea that the key to understanding Daniel's prophecies was understanding the feast of the Lord and their prophetic fulfillment. This information was shut up until the last days. Isaac Newton, like Daniel, didn't need to know, but we do. Join us in the Lester Summerall Television Studios, where this multimedia presentation on the Prophecies in the Feast of the Lord was recorded by the Prophecy Club. This is Bible Prophecy 201. Now, episode 22 in the 26-part series on the Prophecies in the Feast of the Lord, and He, the Messiah, shall confirm the covenant. I would like to go into the book of Daniel, into the 9th chapter of the book of Daniel, and speak to you concerning the Ark of the Covenant and the confirmation of the covenant. Daniel was an old man. He was in his 80s. He had been the president of Babylon under 3 emperors, under Nebuchadnezzar, under Belshazzar, and now under Darius the Mede. He was an old man, and he was reading the book, the scroll of Yirmiyahu, or Jeremiah, which was written in the hand of Baruch, the scribe of Jeremiah, in which it stipulated that there would be 70 years for the captivity of Israel, of Jerusalem, and the Judeans who were carried away into Babylon would be carried away for 70 years. Why 70 years? Because the prophecy of Moses was what was being fulfilled. We see that the prophecy of Moses spoke that every 7th year you will have a Sabbath year, in which during that year you will not plant and you will not harvest. Everything that comes up of its own will be left for the poor, it will be left for the Gentiles, and that in the 6th year you are going to have such an abundant harvest that it will last you all the way through the 7th year or the Sabbath year. Then in the 8th year, you're going to plant again, and you're still going to be eating of the produce of the 6th year. And after you plant, and then that harvest comes in the 9th year, you will still be eating of your 6th year harvest in the 9th year, at the time that you are reaping the produce of the land. That was God's promise to Israel. Not only did He give a 7th-day Sabbath, in which that day He set aside, He sanctified it and made it holy, and He said, that is a day that you can tell the world to keep their money, keep their entertainment, keep their jobs. God is my sufficiency. I don't need you. And in fact, the Sabbath has kept Israel. It's not that Israel's kept the Sabbath has kept Israel.
And we also see that God made a provision for his people that if they would trust him, that he would do such a miraculous thing that all the world would wonder at God's great blessings to Israel. Now, Moses said, however, if you don't keep this Sabbath year, then I am going to have your enemies come down, and they are going to take you into captivity. And they were going to take you into a strange land, and the land will have its Sabbaths. The land will rest. So God is basically saying through the mouth of Moses, we're going to do a Sabbath year in which the land is going to rest. And either we do it my way, and you let the land rest, or if you don't want to do it my way, I'm going to take your enemies, and they're going to carry you into captivity, and the land is going to rest. So either we're going to do it my way, or we're going to do it my way. Either way, we're going to do it my way. And we see that historically, for 490 years, Israel never kept the Sabbath year. 490 years, they never kept the Sabbath year. And that's why God took them into captivity at the hand of Nebuchadnezzar for 70 years. Because there are 70 Sabbath years in a 490-year period, and that is the duration that they were to be taken into the land of Babylon. So what Moses spoke came true. He was the sent one from God, and he also spoke that there is another prophet coming. If you do not hear him, you will be cut off. And it is here that Daniel is now praying about the end of this captivity. He knows that it is near. And as he is praying, it says that the angel Gabriel came to him. It took the angel 2 weeks because he was in battle with the prince of the Persians, over the Persians, in the spirit realm, and it took him 2 weeks to get there. And when the angel appeared, then it says that he spoke these words to Daniel. 70 weeks. The word weeks is Shavuah in the Hebrew. It means sevens. 70 sevens are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish their transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. The angel gave an outline and said that it would take 70 Shavuah in which all of these things would be fulfilled. Now, those of you who have read the prophets realize that in the Hebrew way of thinking and being, you don't have everything laid out either alphabetically or chronologically as far as a numerical order. So many times we're just given all of the details of it, and then we have to see how the Scripture then allows us to understand the order of these events. And you'll see that right in this passage where we're reading here. But it will take 70 Shavuah in which all of these are to be accomplished. That's the overview. Those are the guidelines. And now the angel Gabriel is going to go into the detail as he continues to speak. Know therefore and understand, Daniel. From the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 Shavuah and 62 Shavuah. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And here we have a perfect example of this not being in chronological order, because if it were, it would read this way. Know therefore and understand, from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. Unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That parenthetical statement there, the street will be built again, and the wall even in troublous times, those parentheses show cause and effect. It gives more detail to the body of what is being spoken. But it doesn't necessarily fit in with the chronological order of things. It just puts it in there so we can see that there is ancillary evidence that's given, or a little bit more detail to show cause and effect, and to show some of the details of what will take place in this period of time. But the main thing that's being spoken here is to understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 Shavuah and 62 Shavuah. And when the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem was given, to where Israel then began to make their move back into the land of Israel, back into the countryside of Judea, and rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, rebuild the city, and it was done in a very troublous time. In fact, it was Sanballat who was coming against those workers there, who were attacking them, trying to keep those workers from rebuilding the wall. And it says that they had a sword in one hand and they had their trowel in the other. Literally what happened is that half the people worked on security and the other half worked as far as building, and they traded off and on with each other until the breach was sealed up. And that was the troublous time in which it was done. But we see that from the going forth of that commandment until the Messiah the Prince was literally 7 Shavuah and 62 Shavuah, or a total of 69 Shavuah, 69 weeks of years, 483 years, until it says, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And it was in the 483rd year that the Messiah was cut off. He was cut off, but not for himself. We see that when he was cut off, his blood was poured out for the remission of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, that his blood anointed the most holy altar on planet Earth, the Ark of the Covenant. And then we saw that that took place at Passover on Aviv 14, 40-29. That is when the most holy was anointed. And then it goes on to say, and the people of the princes shall come, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And we saw that after Messiah was cut off, 40 years later, we saw that the Roman army came through and literally destroyed the city and the sanctuary, which was a fulfillment of what Joshua had said, that there is not going to be one stone left upon another on that temple. The sanctuary was literally cast down, not one stone upon the other was left. All that remains there in Jerusalem to this day is the stones that form the retaining wall. None of the temple is there. Not one stone is up there. Only pieces have been found. Individual pieces, and they've been very small and very difficult to determine these things. And so it gives, again, it's giving a little bit more evidence, but this isn't in the main body of what the angel is speaking. And then it goes on. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And he, the question is, who is it, the he who confirms the covenant with many for 1 week? The word he is a relative pronoun, and it relates back to the closest associated noun in the English language and also in the Hebrew. So the question is, who is the he who confirms the covenant? Because this covenant is part of what has to be described within the whole body or the outline of what the angel Gabriel had already indicated. Because now we're back into the main body, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. To whom does the he relate? He relates back to the Messiah, who is cut off, but not for himself. It is the Messiah. When he was cut off, when his blood poured out of his side, went down that earthquake crack through 20 feet of bedrock into the broken open stone sarcophagus that Solomon had put there 1,000 years before, in which Jeremiah, 500 years after Solomon, had hidden the Ark of the Covenant when he secreted it off from the Temple Mount by using the sand hydraulic stone elevator system that Solomon had built in the temple, and then he got it into the subterranean passages under the Temple Mount, through Solomon's quarries, down the passageway into that cave in which Solomon had put a stone sarcophagus 500 years earlier. When Jeremiah hid it, then 500 years after that, when Yahshua, hanging on the cross, in his final declaration, cried out, "It is finished." And he bowed his head, the earth quaked and the rocks rent and split open the ground. That earthquake broke open the top of that stone case, and when they pierced his side, the blood and water poured out of his side out onto the west end of the Ark of the Covenant. That is the altar that God prepared for his son that took 1,000 years to perfect. To put it there right under the location that at one time Abraham had built a stone altar and then put the wood of the sacrifice on, of which his son Isaac was bound. And God provided a lamb, a male lamb of the first year, as a substitute at that time, but it was a shadow picture because thousands of years later, God's son would be sacrificed as he was bound to the wood of the sacrifice above a stone altar that God had prepared for his son. That when the Messiah was cut off and his blood poured out upon the most holy altar on planet Earth, the Ark of the Covenant, the golden altar of sacrifice, that is when the Messiah was cut off, not for himself, but for our sin. And his blood was poured out as the atonement for our iniquity and our sin. And it is he, the Messiah, who shall confirm that covenant. Remember, he took that cup and said, "This is the new covenant in my blood, which will be poured out for the remission of sin," just hours before it took place. What was the covenant made by the Messiah's blood when he was cut off? It was the new covenant in his blood. And just as it says in Ephesians, that the enmity that was sown in our flesh, the enmity that natural man has against God's commandments. Remember, it is a natural man who doesn't subject himself to the commandments of God. He has enmity against God's commandment. He doesn't want to obey. He is at enmity with God's plan. It says that that enmity was nailed to the cross. That animosity against his law and commandments was nailed to the cross. That enmity was nailed. And unless men teach us to have enmity, after the Messiah has nailed that enmity to the cross, our natural response is, if you love me, keep my commandments. Yes. That's our natural response, unless we are poisoned by religion. Because why religion poisons us is because men make rules and regulations, doctrines and commandments, that they would rather have you incarcerated, controlled by their rules and regulations than be free in the Messiah to just love him and keep his commandments because you love. Not because it is in tables of stone, because it's been written on your heart. Just like Ruth. The Torah was written in her heart. She wanted to love. She wanted to obey. And because that was her heart, it was a condition of her heart that the kinsman redeemer took a bride of the Gentiles. She didn't want to argue with him. She didn't want to have enmity. She just wanted to love and to be part of God's plan. The new covenant made in his blood. And that covenant must be described in the context of all that is accomplished within the 70 Shavuot. As we go back to see what the angel Gabriel had said right at the beginning, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Well, we can easily see that everlasting righteousness isn't part of our experience right now, but we can see that what happened when the Messiah was cut off is at least we know that reconciliation for iniquity was made then. We know that that is when he and his blood anointed the most holy. We can see that when his blood anointed the most holy, that is when the new covenant was bought and paid for in his blood. And that is when the most holy was anointed, and yet we see that he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. We have seen that from the going forth of the commandment until the Messiah the Prince is cut off is 483 years, or 69 Shavuot. Then we see that there is 1 Shavuot left, according to what the angel said. 1 Shavuot left, right? 1 7-year period that's left. We see that the he, the relative pronoun he, relates back to the closest associated noun, which is the Messiah who's cut off but not for himself. But yet we have heard, as of the 70s, a famous American author of Bible prophecy, of which his book has been now reworked at least 20 different times to try to get it up with what didn't happen. And it was he who said that the he would be the prince that shall come. But it says the people of the prince that shall come. Of the prince that shall come, again, is in a prepositional phrase and is not in the direct line of the antecedent to the preposition or the relative pronoun he. Sorry to have to do that to you after high school, but you know, sometimes it's necessary to go back to the English language and see to whom the relative pronoun actually fits. And it does not relate back to the he within the preposition there. So now we see that the Most Holy was anointed at Passover. And the Yom Kippur is the most holy day of the year, the Day of Atonement. That is the only day on which the high priest could enter in before the Ark of the Covenant and sprinkle blood on the east end of the Ark of the Covenant. Only one day, and that had to be done when the entire nation fasted after the 10 days of awe in preparation to come up to this day with their sins being confessed. And when he went in and sprinkled that blood on the east end, all those years, no one knew why 7 times on the east end. The rabbis cannot tell you why it's always on the east end. But what do we know? That each one of the feasts of the Lord is a shadow picture of that which the Messiah must fulfill. And we see that when his side was pierced, blood went down and anointed the west end of the Ark of the Covenant, the end on which no animal blood was ever allowed, which is the right hand of the throne of God. We have to ask the question, if the Day of Atonement is the only day that the high priest could enter in before the Ark of the Covenant and sprinkle blood on the Ark of the Covenant, why did the Messiah's blood fall on the Ark of the Covenant at the time of Passover? You have to ask the question because they are all prophetic shadow pictures. You can't ignore it. God could have put the Day of Atonement on Aviv 14. He could have put it at the time of Passover and sprinkled the Passover lamb's blood on it. He could have done that, but he didn't. Why? Passover is the picture of personal redemption. You and I were bought and paid for on that day. And those who personally apply that blood over the doorpost of their heart and on the lintels, they are the ones at that point who are atoned for. It's the atonement for personal sins, taking care of you personally. However, the Day of Atonement is the day of the national redemption of Israel. It is national atonement and national redemption, and it's set in the 7th month because the fulfillment will not come, and he, the Messiah, will not confirm the covenant that was made in his blood with his people until the 7th millennium begins. Now you're going to see how these pictures continue to be defined here. Because we have to ask, when does the week begin and end? Because we have a marker for the last Shavuot, or the last week, don't we? Do we have any time parameters that discuss from when he is cut off until the covenant is confirmed? No, we don't have any time parameters there. We only have the going forth of the commandment till the Messiah is cut off. Then we have the Messiah confirming his covenant, which begins the last Shavuot. So we can then ask, when does the week begin and end? The week begins Tishri 10, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. That is the day of the national redemption of Israel. And that is when God will do such an incredible miracle. Remember what happened, that God said to Moses, I am going to do something that from that day on, that Israel will never doubt you. They will believe that I have sent you. This is the day that's set aside for God to do an incredible miracle in the revealing of the Ark of the Covenant and bringing forth the testimony that God put in the earth of his Son, the Spirit, the water, and the blood that testify in the earth, that testimony that God gave of his Son, which is still into the earth today, north of the city wall of Jerusalem. It is on the Day of Atonement that God will do a mighty miracle and show his hand and his power, and from that day on, when that covenant is confirmed, that is when Israel will no longer doubt that Yahshua, Jesus, is Messiah.
Once a picture is embedded in our mind, it is very difficult to erase the board and start over with a clean slate. Most of us have grown up with a picture of Daniel as a young boy standing safely in the lion's den, but he was more than 80 years old at the time. Popular books on Bible prophecy have painted an erroneous picture that the Antichrist is going to confirm a covenant with Israel for 7 years. But in reality, it is the Messiah who will confirm the very covenant that he made with his own blood, and he will confirm that covenant with his people Israel. The angel told Daniel that the Messiah would make reconciliation for sin and that he would anoint the most holy. That act was accomplished when his blood poured out of his side onto the west end of the Ark of the Covenant, which was buried 20 feet below and 500 years before the event of the crucifixion. He, the Messiah, will confirm that blood covenant which reconciled the world to God when the Ark of the Covenant is revealed in the last days. We invite you to join us again next time for episode 23 in the 26-part series on the prophecies in the feast of the Lord. That day shall not come except first. This is Michael Rood from Jerusalem bidding you shalom, peace, and I'll see you when the smoke clears.